Okay.
Olivia woke up with the same breath as Sadie's first cry. She rolled over to familiar red digits, staring her in the face. 2:36 a.m. I'll go. Jonas's sleepy voice floated over her shoulder. No, you stay, Olivia said. She pushed back the blankets and set her feet on the floor, maneuvering them into the slippers she kept arranged. She turned back to make sure Jonas was still tucked in, that she hadn't left any gaping blankets. In the dark, the curtains were always open, but there was no moon. She couldn't tell if his eyes were open, even while he was saying, I can go this time. I'm up already. Olivia wrapped the paisley throw blanket from the foot of the bed around her shoulders and walked out. Sadie was sitting up in her crib, caught between choking and sobbing, her clenched little fists reaching up to rub at her eyes, her tear-stained cheeks, a wet, flattened, miserable cherub. Mama! She cried. She started to stretch her arms out, then folded them back in toward her face and body, like a boxer's protective stance, unable to stop rubbing. Olivia reached in and pulled Sadie up from the crib. It was like picking up a block. Come on, honey, Olivia whispered against her cheek. It's all right. It was just a dream. But too close, she let her lips touch, and Sadie shrieked and threw her head back and away, almost launching herself out of Olivia's arms into the wall. But Jonas was there, his hands strong against Sadie's back, securing her between the two of them. You didn't have to get up, Olivia said. Jonas shook his head. Might as well. He folded his arms around them both, locking them in. Sometimes the pressure, the saturating cocoon of body heat worked. Often it was the only thing that did. Sadie's breath steadied. She let out an exhausted sigh and put her head back down on Olivia's shoulder. Olivia leaned her own head sideways to rest against her husband's chest. We have to take her in, Jonas said, his voice muffled against her hair. To Dr. Moore, to get her evaluated. It's time. We can't keep putting it off. We need to know for sure. His words trailed off into a kiss in her hair. She relayed the kiss to Sadie's wispy blonde curls. Sadie asleep now in her arms, protected and safe like any child might be. No, for sure, she said. What? If it worked? If we made a mistake? Just say it, Jonas. His voice always got quieter when he was struggling not to cry. Both, he said. The clerk highlighted various signature blocks on each page, then passed the clipboard of pages across the counter. Sign the yellow parts, she instructed in her monotone, then bring them back. Olivia was almost mesmerized by the clerk's voice and wondered if she would sound like that even if she weren't so clearly bored by her own routine words. It was surprising what people in this field got used to. Jonas took the clipboard to the nearest love seat and began reading. Just sign them. Olivia pulled her cardigan tighter around her middle and sat down. She fidgeted. There was a spring underneath her butt, under the faded, worn, thin mauve fabric. The ornate pattern of the seat complemented the old-fashioned wallpaper which traveled up into the shadowy corners of the ceiling. Olivia wondered how much of the building was part of the original and which parts had been remodeled to look old. Certainly the upper floors were more modern and sterile. It's just procedure. I just want to... Jonas's voice trailed off, as he often let it, expecting her to know how his sentence would end. But he signed, then passed each signed paper to her. Olivia signed wherever she saw his signature. If Jonas saw something he didn't like, he'd say something. His way was to absorb each word, every last disclaimer. After the last page, Olivia took the clipboard back to the counter. The clerk flipped rapidly through. If Olivia had signed Audrey Hepburn, it wouldn't have been noticed. The clerk took the clipboard into the back room, leaving Olivia and Jonas alone in the lobby. Jonas patted the cushion next to him. You want to grab some Thai food after this? I need a restroom, she said. She headed toward the first hallway she saw, nearly knocking shoulders with another clerk as she rounded the corner. "Oh, restrooms down this hall," the clerk said. "Second door on the left. Don't go into the first door. That one's being cleansed again. These old buildings, you know." Olivia wondered if the bathroom she went into, the correct one, because she was basically an obedient person, was also haunted and needed cleansing, or if it was cold because it was just an old building. Nothing happened. No eerie shadows in the mirror as she washed her hands. No strange breath at the nape of her neck as she dried them. The water turned hot like in any bathroom. They were out of paper towels, though. She patted her hands dry on her long t-shirt, then, her custom now, put 2 fingers into the waistband of her jeans. They felt like they were finally starting to get a little snug. She pulled the band out and examined the curve of belly. Maybe just her imagination. Walking back, Olivia paused at the first door. She glanced to see if the hallway was clear, then tentatively tried the knob. It was locked anyway. Of course, they had made provisions against curiosity. They didn't want clients sneaking around where they weren't welcome. She wondered what was going on inside, but it was somehow reassuring that she couldn't know. Jonas was flipping through a magazine. "Want to see a movie after?" he said. "I thought you wanted Thai food." He grinned. "Can we sneak Thai food into the movie?" The monotone voice clerk reappeared. "Mr. and Mrs. Calvin, Dr. Moore is ready for you. Please come with me." Jonas stretched out a hand for Olivia just as she stepped back. "You ready?" he said, standing up on his own. Olivia nodded, pulling at her cardigan again. They followed the clerk down a dark hallway and into what might once have been a parlor. Dr. Moore sat behind a large mahogany desk framed by a looming library. She took the file from the clerk while gesturing at the plush armchairs across from her. "Mr. and Mrs. Calvin, good to see you. You're both looking well." Dr. Moore smartly clipped and aligned the stack of papers against the desk, then spread them out. "I'm happy to say the background checks came back clean. No concerns there, so we can continue. Did you have any additional questions?" How dumb, Olivia thought. Of course they had questions. There weren't many documented drawbacks so far, but then this was a fairly new science. People once thought thalidomide and hormone replacement therapy were perfectly all right, didn't they? Mercury treatments, bloodletting. But any questions she had slipped quickly away. She knew they were there, wisps hovering outside her ears, ready to slip back in once it was too late. She looked at Jonas, who nodded understandingly. "Well, we've talked to the references and gone over the material you gave us. I know we've been over it, but I guess our main question is the process, the timing. Be specific, Jonas. She can't read your mind." Her thought made her feel mean, and then silly about her own snippiness, because these were the sorts of questions Dr. Moore must be answering all the time. And she was being too hard on Jonas. Again. She remembered Katie, one of the references they'd met with, when Jonas and Katie's husband had wandered off to the garage to look at something with wheels. Katie turned to Olivia with a sympathetic smile. "Let me give you some advice. You have to be open, always, and you should be kind. The doctors don't tell you that, but it's true. Good vibes breed good results." Katie said she and her husband had taken this advice and had success. She knew of another woman who had fought with her husband all throughout her pregnancy and had failed. A long process, and certainly there's the chance it won't take, Dr. Moore was saying. But that's why we've extended the program to 5 years or 60 months from your first appointment. Now, none of our successful couples have needed the full 60 months. Our cases have averaged about 36 to 40 months, and this is new in our contract. After 48 months, the fee may be partly refundable under mitigating circumstances. We naturally want our clients to be fully satisfied. It's not worth anybody's time, yours or ours, to be dissatisfied with the results. I meant how long it might take until we know, one way or the other, Jonas said. Dr. Moore smiled patiently. Every case is different, so we never guarantee TFD, a time of first detection. But signs can become very clear very rapidly. A birthmark, a facial tic, those are the most common benchmarks. You may recognize other idiosyncrasies, fears, squirrels, spiders, heights, or attractions, a particular love for foods, olives, pancakes, strawberries. It's not necessarily individual quirks, but rather when they're combined with others, you recognize that you see a puzzle forming, a mosaic. Pancakes, strawberry with whipped cream, lots of it, and balsamic vinegar instead of syrup. Her and Jessie's favorite breakfast as kids. That sounded really good. Sometimes the puzzle pieces are hard to recognize, Dr. Moore said, which is why we encourage you to return for a professional evaluation at least every 6 months. Like I said, the majority of cases take about 2 to 3 years, usually by the time the toddler is talking in complete sentences. She smiled. Although, our shortest case, I'd like to add, we evaluated as success at only 6 months. Still a baby. A still baby, Olivia thought. No, think positive. Be open and kind. Pancakes. Strawberries. Oh, God, Jessie loved olives. Will I have to start eating them? And the gender of the baby is guaranteed, Jonas said. Dr. Moore nodded. Yes, to minimize the margin of error and reduce any peripheral unnecessary trauma. It's also part of the contract. Olivia finally remembered a question. If something goes wrong, what would that be? She looked at Jonas, her husband, her best friend, her pillow, her crutch, and she knew he saw it. But then he looked away. He wasn't going to ask. He was supposed to get that answer, the most important answer, and he couldn't do it. Dr. Moore paused, moving her pen down the page. Memory is also, of course, a strong indicator of success. It often first appears through dreams, sometimes quite vivid, visceral dreams. Pardon my bluntness, Mrs. Calvin, but do you know if your sister passed quickly? An avalanche cascaded, image after image, the wreck, the body, the nauseating bouquets, and Olivia couldn't speak. Then the moment was too long, and Jonas said, they said it was upon impact. The windshield, he took her hand. It was quick, he said quietly. Then you may need to prepare for that, Dr. Moore said. If necessary, the dreams can sometimes be managed with the proper medication. To be frank, this area needs further exploration. How do you know it'll be her? Olivia blurted, pulling her hand away. How can you promise that it'll be her? Dr. Moore leaned forward. Mrs. Calvin, as I've said, we can't promise, but we've documented a 73% accuracy rate, which is a phenomenal improvement from just 5 years ago. Every case receives personalized attention by our best scientists, and they will share all those details with you every step of the way. But we are working with a very short window of time here. How far along are you? Jonas turned. Olivia, are you sure? We can do this, naturally. These dreams, these side effects. Maybe we should just wait and see if the baby has her own. No, she said. No. It has to be Jessie. It has to be this way. Dr. Moore came around the desk. She smoothed her long skirt before kneeling in front of them, then reached for Jonas's left hand and placed it on Olivia's belly. Olivia looked at his hand, his calloused handyman's fingers, so knotted he often couldn't take his wedding ring off, still so knotted with grief they were warm on her belly. He knew her body as well as she did, maybe better. She wondered if her belly felt as flat to him as it looked to her. as though nothing were happening. He nodded. Anything you want, honey. For some reason, that hurt. She couldn't look at him. She could only reach in one direction, but he was trying, always trying. Be kind, she heard Katie say again. It would be so easy to just put her hand over her husband's. She wanted to, but his hand was so warm and she was so cold, she didn't want to dilute the warmth. But she let it stay there and said, I'll be 6 weeks along tomorrow. No better time than the present then, Dr. Moore said. Let's bring Jessie home.